Yeah, hello and welcome to our lecture series on climate protection. So today I'll announce Esther Blanco. Esther Blanco is a professor of economics at the Institute of Finance of the University of Innsbruck. She is deputy head of the Economy, Politics and Society research area and coordinating lead author of the Austrian Climate Report. She also contributes to the scientific community of the Ostrom workshop on commons and governance. Yeah, she really has a wide research interest in economic services, public goods, common pool resources, governance, incentives, economics, global south, greenwashing, and the nations. In the program of today, also René Schweiger was announced, but he will present with Esther Blanco in a joint lecture in the upcoming summer semester. But for today, we are looking forward to the presentation, Cooperation for Conservation of Natural Resources. Thank you for coming, Esther Blanco.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here today sharing some of the insights of what we have been working from economics into cooperation for conservation. All right, so what I'm presenting today will be it's a dedicated lecture that I've prepared for the session of today. And I'm happy to expand here or there depending on the interests and needs of the audience. So I will be more than happy to expand, to further develop on any topics of interest, either as we go or at the end during the Q&A with pleasure. So when we think about cooperation, this is at the center of a lot of what society means. This is at the center of what keeps us together. This is from an evolutionary perspective at the center of what defines us as species. This includes a broad collection of behaviors, for example, feeding those in need, which is one of the most fundamental sorts of solidarity and reciprocity within societies. It includes also, and this is also relevant from an evolutionary perspective, these sort of gatherings for social cohesion, like the Olympics, right? We all get together. A lot of this is based on volunteering work. A lot of people that work together, not for profit, but to achieve something big together. And this is what we have seen as species, that the first settlements that we were developing as society were events of gathering, of doing things together, hunting together, building together, developing temples together. This idea that we cooperate to make things bigger than the individual can achieve is at the center of what has made us a successful species. Cooperation includes also, on a daily basis, a lot of behaviors that sustain better status of natural resources. So think about who of you has gone to one of these activities in your municipality or with one youth club or something like this to go and clean a riverbed or a forest, right? The picking up garbage is one of the very close by type of cooperative activities that we do. But, you know, me as a child of the 80s, I remember the origins of the conservationist movement internationally with the Save the Whales claims. So this was really getting together as an international community to pressure for something that was at the time very likely, that was to avoid the extinction of collection of species of whales. This included a wide expression in different forms in different parts of the world, from demonstrations in many countries, me as a child, demonstrations in my school, with my family, to all the way up to people that were actively getting in between the vessels and the whales. All of these are different expressions of a joint international action to help together preserve a given species. This is a lot of what is behind what we know today as the conservationist movement in the West. Moving more closely into what is conservation for the climate? There are a wide collection of behaviors that would fall under this category. These are behaviors that, from a private perspective, individually, if we only look at costs and benefits, we wouldn't do, but we would do when we include broader set of ideas. When I change the way I go to school as a kid, or I change the way I commute to the uni, or I commute to work, not because this is the most convenient for me, but because I think that this is the right thing to do for the climate. And this can be a decision that I make as a person, but it's a decision that can be very much influenced also by what the other people around me do. So many of these activities, commuting, eating, going on vacation, are activities that we do in groups together. And we're not doing these things one totally independently from one another. So there is these strategic considerations that I will go in more detail. At the same time, these are things for which it's not only the individual, the people, individual people that have a say on, but also where groups can articulate to develop collective action. What would that mean? That would mean protest, encouraging passing of new infrastructure, passing of new regulation, developing changes in the system by itself and not only what the individual does. So cooperation affects all of these different dimensions. It's not only individual behavior, it's also strategic behavior, and it's also collective action. What we do together, how we organize ourselves together, how we decide that we do things in our group. So why do we do any of that? Well, because there is growing and piling evidence that we do care as a species. Not every single human cares about protecting the environment or the conservation of natural resources. Not every single one individual cares about preserving the climate. Granted. But a broad majority do. So this is recent evidence from data collected in 2023. Have you seen this graph before? Anybody? No? So data collected in 2023 in 63 different countries, asking, do you think climate change is a serious threat to humanity? And 0 would be completely red. Dark blue is between 90 and 100% of the people interviewed in that country saying yes. So a very simple way of looking at this graph is that there is no red or yellow. What does that mean? A majority of the representative samples that were interviewed in each of these 63 countries are in agreement with the fact that climate change is a serious threat to humanity in 2023. So there need to be a collection of facts that we understand as facts and for what they are, and that we incorporate into how we live and make decisions together. Why do I say that? Because actually, from that same study, they then went ahead and asked, would you be willing to give 1% of your income, 1% of your income, think about it, to tackle climate change? Yes or no? What you see in the horizontal axis is the people that said, yes, I would. And what you see in the vertical axis is what they said they believe other people would say, right? So I say yes, but I can say, I don't think that the rest will, right? So if the likelihood of saying yes in a population and the expectation was correct, we would see all the dots for each. Can you see the mouse? All the dots would be in this 45-degree line. Do we see any dot in this 45-degree line? No. They're all systematically to the right-hand side. What does that mean? That systematically, in each one of these 63 different countries, people are overly pessimistic about how much others want to do. The share of people that say yes is much larger than what we think. And this can affect the way we act, right? So when you think about the type of behaviors that we have been discussing, all of this cooperation is more rewarding the more you feel that this is something that we're all doing together. The value of my action increases with me thinking that I'm part of a group that is bringing this great thing together. Now, if I am overly pessimistic, this can drag me down, right? So start to get beliefs correct is one of the steps that we think of when we think about managing climate action in a more constructive way. Because we still have the problem that we have increasing temperature anomalies. You've seen the data from Copernicus from last week. So 2024 was the first year in data collection history where we're above 1.5 degrees already. We were every month above those of 2023, all the way until the summer, and then very close thereafter. So the problem is still there. We still need to mitigate these emissions. We're pessimistic about what others want to do, despite we're quite likely to say that we ourselves want to do something. And we see raising increases in climate anxiety. So the Google searches for climate anxiety and related terms between 2017 and 2023 increased 27 times. 27 times more Google searches about climate anxiety within this time frame. This is an increasing problem, and it's translating into collection of social radicalization that it's triggering mixed reactions among the general population and politicians. We've seen some of this in Austria, we've seen some of this in Germany, elsewhere in the European Union, some of these social protests about climate change being criminalized. So bringing social cohesion, bringing the capacity to work together is at the core, I believe, of what is a constructive way forward. That we don't keep ignoring the feelings of others, the actions that others want to do, and that we do not criminalize the worries. How can we bring all of this together? So the way I have been working to put these pieces of the puzzle together has been by addressing two different lines of research. On the one hand side, to understand how to study cooperation for conservation, that is, where does that come from, to understand how it works, what motivates us, when, how is it increased, so on and so forth. And the second, to ask ourselves, can we train this cooperation? Can we become better at working together in solving this gigantic problem? Okay? And what I will be doing today is to give a general intro to each of these topics and present one example of ongoing research that I'm doing in my research team for each of these two. Does that make sense? Yeah. If there's anything as we go that you need to get out of your chest, please raise your hand. Any conceptual unrest? Yes, please. We need the microphone, just teeny tiny second. You didn't know about the microphone.
So could you, I didn't just get the part of the social radicalization. Do you mean it enforces the problem overall, or what was your point with that?
My point is that when we have social movements that request action in a given direction, in a way that generates a response that is of rejection by different sectors of the society, which can be broad enough to include the current governments of different countries, then this is not a promising way forward. When we, to be more specific, if we go down a path where we're protesting so that there is more climate action is considered a terrorism act, how is that helping anybody? How can we think that in 5 years from now we will be better in terms of climate emissions, temperatures, so on and so forth, in terms of outcomes? Is that something that we can be optimistic as a way forward? I'm not attributing ethical legitimacy, right? I'm just trying to be very pragmatic, where the path on which we are, where there is justified anxiousness, and this anxiousness translates in actions that can be considered terrorism, this will not generate policies, actions, outcomes that are better for the climate and better for society as a whole. That was the main point, without entering into the ethical, philosophical aspect of it, if that's what worried you. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Okay.
Somebody else has, I mean, these are sensitive topics. That's why I really want that we work together through the lecture. Okay, so let me start with how do we study cooperation for conservation? And of course, this is not a complete overview of the whole discipline. This is just an insight and one example, okay? So a lot of what we do is to use economic experiments. So economics, many moons ago, started as a discipline that was close to philosophy, thinking about description of processes, and definitely not a quantitative science. Over the past few decades, there has been a collection of Nobel Prize winners that have got their awards for doing advances in bringing economics closer to quantitative methods in the natural sciences, specifically by developing experimental methods, meaning systems by when one designs an experiment, just like in a chemistry lab or a biology lab, any of the natural sciences lab, physics lab, where you have a control condition and you have treatment conditions where you do only one ceteris paribus variation. You keep all of the rest of your variables constant, you only change the one thing, okay? And then you assess outcomes in each of these two conditions. Because you are in the lab, everything is controlled, right? You can monitor everything that is going on and guarantee that the only change is this one variable. This allows you to attribute causality. Difference between treatment A and treatment B is because I change this variable in this way, okay? The difference is that we're not analyzing how molecules behave. We're not analyzing the speed at which chemical reactions occur. We're not analyzing, bacteria in a petri dish. We're analyzing how people make decisions. And to make these decisions salient, one of the key definitions of the methods in economics is that we are paying people for their decisions. So they're playing Monopoly, let's say, but with real money. They come to the lab, they know they will earn on average 15 euros per hour. This is not nothing, right? You're sitting in one of these cubicles. This is the econ lab here at the University of Innsbruck at the Soviet. You're all invited to join as subject pool. We're always very happy to have more people participating in our experiments. These are not invasive. They do not, there's no deception, so we never lie. There's, everything is completely anonymous, confidential, and so on and so forth, okay? So people come in, they get these numbers as opposed to names or anything. We give them cards, they sit somewhere, and through these computers, they're playing this type of monopoly type of situations with real money, right? At the end of the day, somebody who is sitting here in the front records for each one of them how much money they made. Today, you were here for an hour and a half, you made, maybe somebody made 50 euros, maybe somebody made 10 euros, okay? Because depending on your decisions and the decisions of others, how much money you make varies, right? What we specify is that on average, this will be 15 euros, but this is not deterministic. There would be no game, right? When you pay Monopoly, sometimes your decisions are in a given way, sometimes are in a different way. The outcome changes, correct? So the same here. You can come one day, the situation under which you're deciding is a given set. Could be that it's only an individual decision. What you do is the only thing that affects how much you're paid. But there are decisions that happen in groups. And then it's what you do and what the other people in your group does, which affects how much you're paid. Now, you will never know with whom you played. This is one of the rules that we have. You have anonymity, and you never have, so you need to have anonymity with whom you play also. So we have multiple groups in a given session. So we have up to 24 people participating, and group size usually is up to 4, sometimes bigger, but not very often, okay? And this allows us to study what we call the fundamentals of human behavior. Why do we call it like this? This is not expected to be one-to-one matches of what people in their day-to-day do, okay? But this is expected to be fundamental aspects of how we humans decide. This means that despite we're looking at abstract type of decisions, we do that intentionally. Why? Because then we can isolate some of the critical factors of a given real-life decision. It's like when you do any experiment in any natural science discipline. You do not analyze the whole universe in your experiment, right? You narrow down to exactly what do I want to study. And within that, I do the treatment variation. Okay? And then next steps is to complement that with field observation, just like in the rest of the sciences. Okay. And then what have we learned through virtually now 50 years of experimental research on cooperation? So there's now wide agreement that it is perfectly rational to cooperate. You know how economists love the word rationality, right? And the theory of rationality is very popular. I think its rationality is all about maximizing utility. And utility is a measure of how happy you are, basically. Oftentimes in economics, we take as a shortcut payoffs, money. But what we know by now is that money, despite this might sound obvious, money is not the only thing that drives people. The utility functions include money, include payoffs, but are not limited to that. Okay? We know, for example, that reciprocity plays a role. You're more likely to cooperate with other people that have reciprocated to you in the past. This, you scratch my back, I scratch your back type of things, right? But also that you can care about preservation of species per se. I do care about the whales existing. I do care about the pandas existing. My 6-year-old loves pandas existing, right? Favorite animal in the world. But he's not alone, right? So we see that there's empirical regularities of these being present in a majority of the population internationally. Okay. So more specifically, how do we use these labs to study cooperation? So the very simplest version of an experiment to study cooperation is what we call a public goods game. So I'm using this figure here in the bottom. This is from a recent paper that we got in PNAS. So basically, this blue bubble is a group of 4 people, 1, 2, 3, 4. They would be sitting in the lab. Each of them have 100 coins. Okay? Each of them can decide to keep the coins for herself or put part or all of the money in this pot in the middle. Every euro that is put in the pot in the middle is multiplied by 0.4 and then distributed evenly to everybody. So think about it. If everybody keeps the money for themselves, how much do they make? 100, right? What they had. They walk home. If everybody puts everything in, how much each of them gets? 400 times 0.4, right? Much more. Yeah, 400 times 0.4. But what if I keep all my money and everybody else puts everything in? Then I'm free riding on them. They're putting the effort, I benefit from their effort, and I keep all my money for myself. Here's the tension, okay? If I am too afraid that everybody else takes advantage of me, it might end up being the case that each of us takes the 100 euros and go home. And we're foregoing the possibility for each of us making much more money than that. Questions? This is the workhorse of studying cooperation. Okay, so what type of things do we change in this type of environments? In this one study, in one of the different things that we included, what we change is the multiplication factor. For everything that you put in, it's multiplied by 0.8 as opposed to 0.4. So the gains for cooperation are much higher in this darker blue environment, right? And here, as compared, what we do is we reduce the endowment to half. You don't have 100 euros, you have 50 euros to make decisions with. So when we compare this treatment to this treatment, this is only the effect of increasing the benefits of cooperation. When we change from this treatment to this treatment, it's only changing the endowment, how much money you're making decisions with, your wealth. Is that clear as an example? Okay. So this is, let's say, the old stuff, how it began, right? And we're still revisiting some of these things for purposes in this study that we just got published, where we had only seen one-time decisions. Just you come once, you make this decision, you go away. Usually in the lab, what we do is we have repeated decisions. You make this decision once, I tell you about what your group did as a whole, and then you make this decision again. This is how we usually do it. And in this type of settings, what we're using to consider cooperation for conservation is richer type of decision environments. Well, in some situations, what we have are probabilistic public goods. Whether the benefit materializes or not depends on how much joint effort do we make. Only if all of us put enough effort, then this public good will actually benefit each one of us, okay? Then there's what we call the collective risk social dilemmas. This is a given type of game where the idea is that we all need to cooperate or else a given damage will occur to our group. This is very much inspired on climate problems, right? We need to achieve a given amount of joint cooperation so that we avoid a loss for the whole group. And sometimes we know how big the loss is, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we know where the threshold is, sometimes we don't. Sometimes all of us are the same, sometimes some of us are richer than the others. Okay? So all of these type of variations have been included in the literature, and you have a list here for the interested reader, basically. And I have been working also on including not only mitigation, all of this is inspired by mitigation of natural disasters, but also adaptation. The fact that you can protect yourself privately. And this is at the core of this ongoing work that I will be presenting to you. So this ongoing paper, what we ask is, why do people focus on individual adaptation in dealing with climate change? And we know that from empirical evidence, like looking outside of the universities into the real world, but also in these controlled environments, we also see that this happens. Why is that? Are we selfish, or do we have too much uncertainty about how others will behave? You remember that graph with the 45-degree line? If I am overly pessimistic, it's sufficient for me to be dragged back. Not that I'm selfish, but that I'm overly pessimistic. Okay? And this is what we investigate exactly in this paper. We do that in a very artificial type of environment, but what we want to understand is, when it comes to climate change, when we look at heat waves, what do we do about heat waves? AC. Install an AC. Spend the summer under air conditioned. Okay? What do we do about flooding? Oh, we need to change where the homes are, or we need to flood proof them. And this is even in the New York Times, there was this article. The title of the article is this captation: Preparing for the World's End Just in Case. And this is a company that sells bunkers. Why are we doing this? I mean, none of these things are very expensive and not very cheap, right? So these are expensive alternatives. These are uncomfortable alternatives. Yet this is where we're putting the eggs in our basket. Why? Why don't we invest this amount of extra money in activities that bring more mitigation? Are we selfish, or we don't trust others? So what do? We have some players, green players here, that can invest a given amount of resources into their own pockets. I can keep the money, or I can invest it in protect me and other people, or I can invest it only in protecting me. Okay? We have other type of players, these orange players, whose decision is basically to sit and watch. The only thing that they can do with their money is to keep it, and they are affected by what these green guys are doing, right? If the green guys invest into protecting the whole group, the green and the orange, they will be protected. If the green guys only protect themselves, so sorry, we live in the bunker and the world ends. Okay? I'm exaggerating, but this is the idea, right? So a damage occurs to the whole group, and the only one that is protected is the green, and the orange faces the full potential damage. Is that clear? Okay. Sometimes groups are two people. In a two-people environment, there is no uncertainty, right? If I am the green person, everything is deterministic. I know exactly what happens depending on what I do. But what happens when we have 3 green and 3 orange? Well, now as a green player, it's not clear anymore what the outcomes will be. The outcomes will depend on my actions, but also on the actions of the other 2 green. Okay? As a group, we need to achieve a given amount of group protection, the blue strategy, to protect everybody. Okay? All the 6 players. So now there is uncertainty. There is this strategic problem. What should I do? Right? And then what I expect others do becomes very, very relevant. Okay? We will include, in addition, another layer in some treatments where we allow the orange players to not be completely helpless, but to say, hey, I want to contribute by putting some money in. So these would be people who cannot themselves decide on mitigation strategies, but they can support the efforts of others. Okay? For example, when we think about flood risks, one of the strategies that can be put in place to protect cities is to have the farmlands close to the cities be flooded in the upper part of the river. So basically, you let the river overflow over the fields before reaching cities. Okay? Can the people in the city do that? No. Who can do that? The people that own the fields upriver. Okay? So it's a technical impossibility. It's not that all of us have the same capacity to provide protection for the group. But even if we're of the orange type, that we cannot actively make this protection for the group, there are institutions such as payments for ecosystem services that allow people to put money in to compensate for the efforts of others. And this is the idea. Okay? So we will do treatment variations that aim at two things. One, to artificially eliminate the strategic uncertainty by having only 2 players as opposed to 6. And this allows us to identify to which extent the overuse of the individual solution is motivated by strategic uncertainty rather than selfishness. Okay? The lab is great for that. This cannot happen in the real world, right? We manipulate, we do something completely artificial so that we can pinpoint where does that come from. And the second one, we will be test bedding institutions. So we see whether we can put in place some voluntary instrument that allow us to increase the use of the collective solution. Are we helpless, or can we develop institutions? Okay? All right. So that's the collection of treatments. Here we have the 3 green, 3 red. The red can do nothing. 3 green and 3 red with the voluntary transfers. 3 green and 3 red with the transfers and pledges. I will be doing that much. Okay, and you say that in advance to the group. Or the 2 people world. Okay, questions? All right, so what are the results? First, what we see is that in the absence of transfers, so without institutions, eliminating the strategic uncertainty increases the use of the collective solution by 38 percentage points. This is a lot. That's what you see comparing this column and this column. The difference is extremely significant, okay? And here you have the results from the regressions. This one here, okay? So strategic uncertainty is a very big factor in understanding why we're not doing as much as we should in terms of climate protection. We're unsure about what others will do, okay? Now, it is important to remark anyways that the use of the collective solution, this is 50%, close to 50%. This is not at 100%. So even when you know completely what is going on, even when you have full control, it's not like you always protect the group. Okay? So selfishness is relevant, but strategic uncertainty accounts for 40% of potential improvements that we could see. Okay? And then, can we do better? Can we try to develop institutions? Are we helpless, or can we develop institutions that help us do better? And the answer is yes. These institutions, even when they're voluntary, so these are not carbon taxes, these are not coercive measures like prohibitions or mandates. This is a voluntary institution to compensate one another. This is the 2 lighter blues that we see here, with and without pledges, okay? So these do significantly better, just not quite as good, okay? What is important is also to think or to observe to which extent these transfers are used by the orange guys. The orange guys can send the transfers, but must not, right? They could decide to not do that. And what we see is that they do, and they do at a higher rate than the equal share. This would be as much as they need. If they contributed this much, they would be compensating fully the green guys. And they do more than that. So they try, through the support, indirect support, to be protected. Okay? But the green guys do not fully reciprocate. They fall short of protecting them. Okay, so what do we make of this small example? Well, we identify that there's a large relevant of a strategic uncertainty in the over-reliance on individual protection. And what we see also is that introducing these proportional transfers, these voluntary transfers, can alleviate this collective risk social dilemma to a similar degree than if we would eliminate the strategic uncertainty. Okay, this is in the lab, very abstract, not externally valid, not the real world, okay? But help us understand something of what's going on in our day-to-day decisions. Then the next step is try to use the knowledge that we have on cooperation to enhance this cooperation. Can we do better? Can we train this cooperation to flourish to a larger extent and generate social welfare outcomes? What do we know in terms of training cooperation? I will be focusing a lot on children, because the training, the majority of the training that has been explored in the literature is working with children, okay? This is the reason. It's not that adults cannot be trained, it's not that adults cannot improve themselves, it's just what the literature focuses on. Okay, so what we see is that children from families with highest socioeconomic status, background, they cooperate more in both conditional and unconditional type of settings, right? So how good off your parents are determine to a large extent how cooperative you are as a kid. This is not because you mimic their individual behavior, though. When we look at the individual level, what your parents do and what you do in the same game, we don't see any systematic, well, we don't see significant systematic correlations, okay? We see that this is at the group level, but not at the individual level. So it's not through imitation of individual behavior of parents, but the fact that having better living conditions, basically, allows children to be more cooperative. In terms of interventions, there hasn't been much happening. So we know that children do increase their cooperation when they have in-class methods that have student-centered teaching. So what I'm doing, the 4-lesson format, me talking and you listening, is not what increases cooperation, okay? Is the idea of working with the students at the center. So when I actually teach these type of things in the bachelor and master classes, what we do is a lot of active teaching methods so that one experiences these decisions, so that one goes into talking in groups, so that it's through exploration that the learning occurs. Okay, we also know that training socio-emotional skills in preschool, so focusing on helping identify and strengthen socio-emotional skills, increases cooperation later in life. And we also see that students that get a scholarship to enter into given schools, they're more cooperative. The idea that I've been given something positive from society, I am more likely to give something back to society. When it comes to climate change, a lot of the literature on climate change interventions has focused on knowledge and awareness of climate. So we come for many, many years of what we call climate literacy, knowledge about the climate. So solar radiation, greenhouse effects, and all of these type of things, right? How the Earth system works. And the results that this type of training has on self-reported climate behavior are mixed, okay? And there's no previous evidence on real-life behavior. At the same time, we see that from the latest IPCC report on mitigation of climate change, one of the knowledge gaps that is identified is to better understand how individual behavior, social interactions, and collective action interact to drive climate actions. And these are the three drivers of cooperation that I've been talking about throughout the lecture today, right? Individual, strategic, collective action. So this project that it's called Cooperation for Climate, what we do is to train these three simultaneously, okay? We train these three factors that the IPCC identify as critical for climate action at the same time, and so that they interact with one another. I give you training on individual behavior, and I connect that with training on social interactions, and I connect that with training on collective action, okay? How do we do that? We do that through action boosting interventions. So basically we give materials to the teachers so that they change what they teach in class with the students. So they follow these protocols. We have a given set of training on these elements and using student-centered methodologies, okay? And we evaluate that using a multi-method assessment. And we do that in schools, so in field settings, real life with all the noise and chaos that comes with daily life, okay? All right. So why training adolescents? So this is why is this focus in the literature on children and particularly on adolescents when it comes to climate literacy and climate action? Well, on the first hand, the neuroscientists tell us that this is a period of brain restructuring such that the way our brain is pruned and the interconnections that happen in our brain at that moment in time have persistent effects throughout our lifespan. Therefore, this is a critical window in which when we do interventions on the way we conceive the reality and society and our role in society have long-lasting effects. At the same time, there's previous evidence that shows that in terms of climate change concern, only about concern, there's reason to believe that training adolescents can influence the perception of the parents back home, that can have multiplicative effects in the families, okay? Okay, so in this study, what are the things that are novel? On the one hand side, the content. So these are the boosting interventions that explicitly train these three elements, and the measurement instruments. So we include, as opposed to the conventional self-reported questionnaires, how much you believe climate change is real, how much it worries you, how much you're ready to, as opposed to all of this, which we include. We also include real-life donations to charities. We give 10 euros to these kids, and we tell them how much you want to keep for yourself, how much you want to give to any of the charities in this list. And we give a list of 8 different charities that they can donate to, any amount, or keep everything for themselves. They're perfectly free to do that. And this is real life money. We also do 2 people public goods games. These games that I've been talking about in the previous example. What we do is to do that in pairs, anonymously, you and somebody else in your class. This is the wording that we use, okay? And then we do belief elicitation, how much you think others will give to the NGOs, and how much you think others will give in the public good, and then the self-reported questionnaires, okay? So this is a curriculum where we have either control schools where they do nothing, or treatment schools where they do these 6 learning units. The new units are on climate action, 3 different ones. And we also include more conventional yet state-of-the-art, very updated climate literacy knowledge, okay? This is based on Lawson 2019 in Nature Climate Change, the battery of interventions. Okay, so this is some of the things that the students do. So they develop activities in class. Here, these activities that they need to envision a desirable future about climate action, and they need to do an art project of their choosing, okay? And this is then set as the ground for a group conversation about what do we do as a group in class about climate change, just as an example. So what's the timing of this? We have in the treatment schools and in the control schools the same surveying instrument, and we do that 1 month before the interventions, 1 month after, and 1 year after. So we have been collecting data 2 years ago, last year, and we will collect data these upcoming semesters. So the data collection for the survey 2 is not finished, and I will not be presenting this today, and I will focus on survey 0 and survey 1. The data collection for these surveys is done either by our staff from the uni or people that we have trained. The adolescents fill up the questionnaire in the classroom, but not by the teachers, it's with us. And the parents fill up the questionnaire at home after their kids have already done that. And this is communicated by the school, however they do it usually. Some schools print things up and give it in paper. Some schools send everything via email. Some schools use internal communication systems. They use whatever they usually do, okay? Okay, these are the different measures. The beliefs, we have not cleaned that data yet, so I will not be able to present today that. I will be presenting the data on individual cooperation, the donations, strategic cooperation, public good, and the self-reported. Okay, results. Adolescents at the individual level. Let me walk you through it. Pink is only treatment versus control without any other control variables, without gender, age, type of school, anything. Okay, it's only treatment versus control. With controls means with these other variables, gender, age, etc. And with interactions means if this is a green school or a standard school. Some of the schools that participated in the project are schools of a green network, and some are not. Okay, so this is one specific type of controls. This here is the main treatment effect. How much kids in treated schools give as compared to kids in the non-treated schools. And this is on average 13 percentage points higher, which in this literature is a gigantic number. So usually we have from these type of field interventions, the treatment effects are something between 2 to 5%. Okay? It's very difficult to change day-to-day decisions with all the noise that comes with that. Here we have very large treatment effects, very robust to including all sorts of controls, which is very good news. And what we also see is that this effect is particularly intense for the kids in the treatment that were in green schools. So when you implement these materials in green schools, the effect is even stronger, okay? Why am I mentioning this? Because one of the typical worries before having the results, when I was presenting this line of research, one of the typical worries was, well, there's schools that are green schools that they're already doing everything there is to be done. So your interventions will be irrelevant in those schools. And it's to my most joy that I can say that actually it is significantly the opposite. In those schools where there is, to begin with, more interest and more previous knowledge, the interventions have a stronger effect. Okay, and then one can say, well, but this is for donations to all different sorts of things, right? What about for the environment? So when we look only on donations to WWF, which is the pro-environmental NGO that we include in the battery, this result is there, is significantly positive. Okay? Now, this is where the effect is not stronger for green schools, but also not smaller. Okay? Specifically for that. And what is interesting is that we see spillover effects. Now, we have been training these kids on climate literacy, take action for the climate individually as a group, and do collective action, and they donate more to other social causes. Pro-poor. So the other list of NGOs here, for you to have an idea, is Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, Red Cross, and so on and so forth. Okay? So we have been training these people to be more cooperative for the climate, and they not only have incorporated that, but they're also transferring this in being more cooperative for different social causes other than the climate, which I think that this is a very neat result also. When we look at strategic cooperation, then is when things become less bright, okay? We don't see significant increases in strategic cooperation in the public good gains. We see that the effect is positive, but very small and not significant. For the self-reported variables, we see that the effects are only significant in the green schools. So it's only for concern, increases in treated green schools, hope, increases in treated green schools, and self-reported behavior improves in treated green schools. What about parents? So what we see is that in the green schools is where the effects appear for parents. So for parents in the green schools, the fact that your kid has been in the intervention as compared to kids in other green schools that were not part of the interventions, you donate significantly more to WWF. You have higher concern, higher hope, and self-report improved climate behavior. So these multiplicative effects on parents seem to be present only for the green schools. Okay? Remember, though, this is green schools treated versus control. Okay? There's 2 questions. Can they take questions? Yes?
My question is just like a point of information. Just like how did you define green schools?
So the question is how the green schools are defined. And here, this is something that I forgot to mention. So this study, this one that I'm presenting you the results for, we did in Catalonia, in Spain. And there is a network of it's called Green Schools Network. That's the name. And this is an association of schools that share best practice in teaching, interest, activities, and so on, so that they're all interested in having greener curriculums in their schools. For example, they would have a garden, they would promote best practices in teaching and in living within the school in terms of sustainability. Does that answer your question? It's a network. It's an informal network of schools, yes. But they self-define as members or non-members, right?
Yeah, because I feel like it can get confusing because you have like Steiner schools, Waldorf schools.
Yes, so it's not about the pedagogics that they use. All of the schools that are part of the study are private schools for an purely admin reason. It delayed the study for over a year that I was very stubborn and really trying to work with public schools. And after a year, I was like, okay, we need to make that happen. So this is why we ended working only with private schools because of admin requirements that public schools would require. So this is the only, let's say, special aspect of this. But this is all the schools, not only the green schools, all of the schools, okay? Yes?
Do you know if most of the parents actively decide to send their children to green schools? Or is it like they're going and then they're getting...
So the question is how the kids select into the schools, if they actively select or if they are allocated to the schools, correct?
Yeah, like if the parents already have...
Yes. So all of these being private schools means that there is an active choosing of the schools by the parents. Okay? And this is why it's very important that we have, for both green and more standard schools, we have both treatment and control. Because what we're doing, all these analyses are diff in diff, meaning that what I'm reporting is wave 1 minus wave 0. At the individual level, I'm taking every child or every parent, and I'm looking at how they answer 1 month after the intervention, how they answered 1 month before the intervention, and I do the difference of those. So I'm presenting individual level differences of these people so that I can control for pre-existent differences that could exist between the different groups. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
That's a question.
All right, I'm almost done. So if I think that 1 or 2 more minutes, I will be done, and then I will be happy to take lots of additional questions and comments. Okay, so what do we take from this? It is possible to train cooperation. We see these large increases in individual cooperation of 13 percentage points, but it's more difficult to train strategic cooperation. When we start into taking strategic aspects into consideration, my expectations about what others will do, and this is the common topic of the lecture today, that for all of this, it's not only what I want to do, what I'm ready to do, but it's also how I see the group in which I am, how I perceive the others. And then when I start focusing on that, it's more tricky also to train cooperation. The very good news is that this training of cooperation for the climate can have spillover to other social causes, which is commonly a big worry, right? And when we think about politicians and political discourse, oftentimes it's like, is it about climate change or is it about weapons? Is it about this or that? As if everything we do in life would have a trade-off. If I do more about climate change, that means that I do less for pro-poor, or I do less for other things. But what we see here is that these interventions achieve increases in pro-environmental behavior, but also increases in active donations towards other practices, not only preferences or self-reported variables, but actual donations by teenagers for other social preferences. And if you allow me to just do this small pause in here, when I was presenting the research program before having data, this was one of the other funny things that I would keep hearing, is that adolescents are helpless. They will keep all their money, they will not listen to anything you say, and the interventions will have zero effect. This is a waste of time. And this is a good example to me of how persistence in science sometimes is rewarding, and after an absurd amount of work, I can actually prove these claims to be wrong. And the students can improve themselves, they do not keep all the money, and they can improve themselves beyond what we train them on, and deploy this cooperation beyond the strict boundaries of what they were directed in the class, and they can influence their parents. Not one-to-one, the effects are weaker on parents, but definitely significant positive effects on parents too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. So now the Q&A session is open. So for the online participants, just write your questions in the chat, and for you, I'll give the mic to you that the others can hear you. Thank you.
So when you mentioned that, where was it? At one point you said you told about the things we already know, and you mentioned that children in high
socioeconomic status.
Yeah, that these children would provide more, would spend or would be more cooperative. And now I was and then you talked about that teenagers in general would be more cooperative. And now I wondered whether it could be because those two kind of groups they don't, it's because they don't have fears of existence, so that because the children who grew up with no fear of thinking of the money because they have everything, maybe that's also a point, because then they think, okay, we can, I can help you because I can't lose as much, and also in general teenagers, because maybe they don't have, they don't know about it.
So this is a very good reflection. I cannot provide a complete answer for that quite yet. I will hopefully in a few more months, once we clean all the data on beliefs. So one of the things that we ask as part of the study is what do you think the others will do for each of these different decisions, right? And then what I will be able to do down the road is to address, first off, all the kids that I'm working with in this study are privileged kids. They attend private schools, okay? So, granted. Within those, what I will be able to do is to control for what is the effect of you being overly pessimistic, meaning you think that the others will do less than what they ended up doing. I will be able to quantify what's the effect of that, versus quantify what's the effect of the wealth of your family. Families that attend private schools differ largely in income. And within this privileged group, I will be able to assess to which extent is the wealth of the family that determines the levels, right? To provide a final answer on what is motivating this, it's not well understood quite yet. Imagine that there's some of the intervention studies that I didn't talk about today in the What We Know, but it's a related interesting case, is for worse off subgroups of the population, so kids that come from destructured families, in poverty or risk of exclusion, with very poor grades and so on. For these subgroups in class, what they developed was a mentoring program where they would have for free one volunteer, which usually would be one of you guys, one university student, spending one afternoon with this kid per week for, I think it was like a couple of hours, like 2 or 3 hours, something like this, once a week, to do anything they decide to do. Can be play soccer, go to the zoo, go to the movies, sit in a cafe, can be anything, help with the classes. I mean, it can be just anything. And it was shown that this had very strong, significant improvements in the performance in class and the performance later in life for these kids. So this lets me to think that it's not only the wealth that you have, but it's also the worldview that your surrounding brings on you. Related to that, there's examples of schools that they have, like problematic schools, that they have redone basically the school from the scratch, changing to a motto of we expect great things from you. Okay? Not changing the pool of kids that attend the school, just changing what the school tell the kids that they expect from the kids, and it has had also amazing positive effects. So it seems that it's more than money that you have. It's something related to the worldview that you construct based on the experiences that you have. But it's not very well understood. So take all of this with a pinch of salt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. My question is probably opening a rather big topic, but if we take the results from this study, how can we project that on general communication regarding climate change? Is the study telling us something, or is the data too small to be projected?
All
what
right.
do we learn out of the whole stuff? Sorry for interrupting.
Sure. No. Sorry for interrupting you. So this is based on a sample. I thought I had that in the slides, but maybe I didn't show it, or I didn't.
I was late.
Okay, fine. So this is based on something like kids for whom we have before and after one-to-one observation is 750. We have more students participating, but some people only came for wave 1, some people only came for wave 2, they were sick, or different things that happen. So we have more than that in terms of participants, but observations for which we can have wave 1 and wave 2 matched at the individual level, we have 750, which rather balance between treatment and control, and this is well powered. So this is one of the things that I should be able to provide in the future. I will take a note of what is the minimum detectable effect size. Okay. But this is well powered. So one of the things that I didn't mention is, so what, right? So, and this is related to your question. So what do we make from that? And for me, what I make is 3 additional studies, okay? Before I can provide a final answer on that, because I want to know, what is it? Is it climate literacy training, or is it climate action training that is driving this result? And on this, we're planning a follow-up in Catalonia, again, next year, starting and building from the testimonials of the teachers that participated. We have been updating the didactic units into something much nicer, I think. And we will be comparing what happens when you only do training on climate literacy, only training on climate action, the 2 together, and none of the 2. Okay, this is more ambitious. That's one of the elements. If you allow me for a sec, in Tirol next year, we're launching one where we will be analyzing within climate action, what is it? Is it the training on individual behavior, strategic behavior, or collective action that is driving the results? So have each of these separately, all of them together, and none. So this will be with something like 5,000 participants starting next year. And in India, also launching next year, where we analyze what is it that is driving the results, the fact that you're acquiring new content, or the fact that you're learning something about your peers, that you're better at understanding what others do and are ready to do, and how their worldview affects your worldview? Or is it the knowledge that the teacher is giving? And after we finish these 3 additional studies, then I will be more confident in answering fully your question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions?
First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. My question is more on your methods in the classroom for getting some of this information, especially for the donation question. I think there was one graph that you showed on how much, like, would you donate to WWF? How was this conducted? Like, did you just ask the class who would donate, who would not?
So we did, before and after, what we did was to send either one of the co-authors or one research assistant that we have trained and hired and is in Barcelona to do these questionnaires in the classroom with the kids. So this was done online with the software that we use to do this type of experiments that allows for anonymous real-time matching, right? So what it allows me is that I give all of you a link. Each of you would click in with a code, which is based on your first 2 letters of your name, surname, and the 2 last years of birth. And with this, you develop a code that is anonymous, right? I will never ask you for your name, only this anonymous code that I will ask you when you do the questionnaire today, and when you do it after so many months, and after a year, okay? And then in the classroom, we walk them through a script for each of the different decisions and for the questionnaire at the end. So there's this person that reads out loud the donation task. This goes, very summary, okay? Each of you will have 10 euros. You can decide how much of these 10 euros you want to keep for yourself and how much, if any, you want to donate to any of the following NGOs. And then there's a list of 8 different NGOs with a summary taken from their websites of what is their mission statement. So Red Cross aims to blah, 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 right? Their own definition from each of these NGOs. It's included in there. And then the kids would type how much they donate to each of them. And at the bottom, it says how much I keep for myself, another number. And then at the bottom says the sum must be equal to 10. So they need to actively click given numbers, and they know that they will be paid for real based on the money that they keep. And what we did, because the schools in Spain were hesitant to give cash, what we did, we gave vouchers for, we don't have the equivalent in Austria, I believe, and it's too bad. It's a cooperative of employers that sell office material, books, games, and, you know, basically anything that a student would need. But definitely no alcohol, no, it's not like a supermarket. You know, these sort of things you need to think of. If you give a voucher for a supermarket and then you end up having students buying illegally alcohol and getting drunk out of your study, it's a big mess up, right? So you want to take care of these things. So this is, for example, for the donation, how we did it. And what we did was to have a matching factor. For every euro that you donate to any of these NGOs, we give an additional euro.
Was there an option to like specify like another reason for using the money? Like say you're like, okay, I want to use this 10 euros to just give it to someone on the street.
You don't need to explain anything. You just give the 10 euros and give it to somebody in the street. This is why we have the matching factor, so that if you care about any of these social causes, but not necessarily, you would have a slight preference for another NGO that is not exactly the aid that we do, by keeping the money and then donating it, you're basically doing half as much good. You know what I mean? So the matching is that if it's about social preferences, we will be able to measure it here. But remember, we do before and after difference, and then we do kids treated, kids in control. So we don't care that much about the levels. What we care is about individual changes in one subgroup as compared to individual changes in the treated subgroup. So there are many things in the method that can affect the level, including that day was sunny, right? Including, was it a man or a woman that read out the instructions? Including the color in the background, right? And what we do in the method is to keep all of these constant throughout. So the same person always went to collect the data, the same person went to treatment and control, you know? So all of this remains constant across all of these and affects the level, but not the treatment differences.
Thank you. Other question?
Is this study that we see there, why did you choose Kerala as a state? I mean, it's quite specific, and I mean, they have huge of natural hazards there, so is that the reason?
So the reason is a combination of factors. On the one hand side, the level of inequality in Kerala is much smaller than in other places in the country. Also, the type of geography is much more, is less prone to problems related to monsoon and stop of infrastructures and access to schools as compared to other regions. And it's a greener state as compared to others, right? So it's not, some states in India live very isolated from their natural environment, to put it in a way, the people in the cities, right? So this is a not too extreme state, if you want. That's the one hand side. And then from a more logistic reason, one of the co-authors had done already work in that state for all of these reasons, and we had the logistic support. So we had this company, Venture Village, that is the one that trained all the local enumerators that went to the school to perform all of the activities. Because what we did in India, these are pilots, okay? This, what you see the pictures is from the pilots, and we're launching next July. So in India, these are extracurricular activities. There is a very strong pressure for kids to perform in the school, and the schools are very hesitant to touch anything about the curriculum, which will not result in better GPA marks. In Austria, the experience was very different. The teachers were very happy to incorporate additional content. So these are cultural differences that one needs to update, right? The implementation. So what we ended up doing in India, and what we will do in India, is to do that as extra curriculum hours in the school, taught by these people from Venture Village. It's a consultancy on teaching innovation. Okay, and they have other programs on other topics, and this is one of the programs that they offer as part of their complementary training education in the schools after school.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but did the kids know what other kids were donating?
What is that? Excuse me?
If these adolescents knew if other adolescents were donating, so since in
Positive
the beginning,
amounts, you mean? So
yeah.
How much they were donating?
Yes.
I should know. So I know these are positive amounts, and I should be able to tell you exactly how much it was on average, but I don't recall.
If they knew what other kids were donating.
No, they did not know. They could have their own expectations, right? So they could make up an idea, but we didn't tell them how much others have donated. And what I cannot answer yet is if they were more or less right, because we have not cleaned the data on beliefs. So this is what's coming up next. So there's two sets of data that you haven't seen that I'm very curious to look at. Beliefs and what happens 1 year after. And just as a spoiler alert, 1 year after we see several of the effects remaining, which is amazing. So even 1 year after the interventions, when we go again and we ask some of these questions again, for some of the effects, we still see positive, significant effects, which we're very happy. But it's still provisional data.
So questions? So maybe one question from my side. In one of your first slides, you stressed the importance of strategic certainty. So when I think about subsidies, they are, in 1 year there is some subsidies, in the other year there is no subsidies, and this is somehow a killer for companies. They build up companies and technologies and so on, and they hope that these subsidies will be offered in the next year too, but if they don't, they will come down. So keeping this in mind, is subsidies a really good idea or not from your point of view? So
generally, everything that is related to uncertainty about the legal system is a problem to deploying innovation technologies, right? So whenever we think about both at the individual level, but also for companies, when we think about upgrading our heating system, when we think about further insulating our house, any so decisions, but also for companies, whether they change a given set of equipment and so on and so forth, it's really beneficial to be able to do some sort of medium-term planning. And having this uncertainty about the legal framework is very problematic. One of the things that I have seen that in my opinion has been very beneficial within Europe over the last 5 years has been to have a very clear, firm, top-down regulatory package that comes from Europe saying, hey, this is how things are going to look like from now until 2030 and until 2050. These are the set of regulations that will come in, at which time these are the set of mandates, incentives, taxes, subsidies that will come in. Having these allows for planning and allows for updating. One of the things that the big oil companies have been doing in the past very strongly has been betting against the commitments from the governments. The governments would keep saying, we're going to transition out of fossil fuels, and they would be investing in massive new infrastructure, right? So this is you as a company betting into this thing that the governments are saying actually never happening, right? And we start to not see that much anymore. We start seeing some of these companies selling bits and pieces of the bigger firms because they're no longer sure what the risk associated with these strategies are. So both within Europe, like as a whole regulatory framework, and within countries have clear paths of action is extremely important so that we can update. Because many of these decisions do not affect only day-to-day decisions. If everything that we change is only day-to-day, what I do today, how I live my life in this given day, this will not be enough for the strength and speed of changes that we need to meet the objectives. And this is what we're seeing. The temperatures keep increasing, right? Our emissions keep increasing. So we're not close to the path, and having this clear capacity to foresee how the regulation will look like into the future would be definitely very beneficial. But this is where political economy problems come into, right? So there can be government changes, there can be shifting weights of majorities within different governments, and therefore it's an inherent part of living in democracy that the social priorities of different governments can change.
There's a question. Have a look on the chat if there's some questions there. So for the online participants, if you have questions, you also can open your mic, but at the moment in the chat there's nothing. Yeah, there's no question. One question on climate action and climate adaptation. You put it somehow in opposite direction. In some cases it's not. So for example, in case of energy efficient buildings, it's going in line. So if you build in an energy efficient way, often you also have a more climate robust building. Or you mentioned the cooling systems to adapt for higher temperatures. You can avoid cooling systems if you build in a clever way. So, for example, well-insulated buildings, sun protection, very efficient sun protection, and so then it's both at the same time climate protection and climate adaptation. So maybe that's,
yes, natural solutions are also commonly an example of where mitigation and adaptation come together. These are subsets of the wide spectrum of adaptation measures that we see. And I personally think that we're seeing too much of adaptation, which is at the expense of mitigation, right? So this is a very, very insightful remark, and it's absolutely correct. Yet many other examples come at odds. And this is what worries me, right? Because in a way, if we go very much down the path of adaptation, we no longer need to worry that much about climate change individually, right? So in a sense, the very cynic view on this is, well, climate change will not affect an Austrian citizen in a very bad way, in a way that we cannot privately adapt to. And if this makes life inevitable in other parts of the world, I cannot care about that, just fence my borders and keep going, right? Full gas. Let's keep the economy up. Let's not think about the effects nationally, because we will just provide additional insurance, provide additional adaptation, put ACs, put more into flood protection, and just don't think that climate change is a priority, right? This could be a very cynical view on it that would actually make the problem worse. And this discourse is there, right? So this is what worries me, that the idea that one can imagine that you privately protect and then there is actually no problem for me, right? There might be a problem for others, but I don't care about the lives of these other people, and so be it, no? And if this happens, then it's not only that I will not focus on adaptation measures that have this co-benefit of mitigation, but it's actually that I will not care about the increase in temperatures, and I will just, potentially get away from all the climate regulations and think that these are not binding. This is what I think is very problematic, right? And actually, it's not scientifically accurate to think that this is a possible scenario, right? But this is the view, that one could build the bunker for the end of the world and just be comfy while everything else burns, right? But this is a business that we're seeing already. These bunkers being sold for tens of thousands of dollars, and people are buying them, right? So this view is not without adepts, let's put it this way. And this is where I think it's very problematic, because if we believe that this is not our problem, it's only the problem of others, and that through wealth we can privately isolate us from the problem, then all the collective action possibilities just evaporate, right? Because you're fully in an extremely selfish path, which is very, very risky for the global planet.
Exactly, this was the reason why when I founded this lecture on climate protection, it was definitely on climate protection and not climate adaptation. There are different lectures. It's also important. I don't deny it's really also important, but this lecture is on climate actions, and that was the reason what you told, that I think that's really important. And I think a good message from economy could be that climate action in form of saving energy is very, very economic. So highly economic. You save money, so you do good for climate protection. At the same time, when you earn money, so you don't need so much to spend so much money for energy, and you do mitigate CO2. So
yes,
at the same time, that's the message.
Definitely for the countries, but also at the individual level, right? Oftentimes, though, what happens is that we face budget constraints. It's not that the decisions, we know from an economic perspective, there is no doubt that action against climate change is economically profitable. It increases social welfare. There is no scientific disagreement on this being true, okay? Actually, the more recent estimates, what they show is that if something, we have been underestimating the benefits of the economic benefits of climate action. So we see that for every dollar that it's spent in climate protection, we avoid many more dollars in avoided future damages. This is very clear. Also at the individual level, the question is who pays for the hot potato, right? We know we need to invest so many trillions of dollars to save so many more trillions of dollars of future damages. But who will pay upfront for this? This is the key, right? Who is the one that, which countries, which individuals, how do we do that? How we finance this transition? And this is the part where we keep pushing it into our children, like it's like our parents were pushing it into us, and we're like try to pushing it into our children. But at some point, the hot potato will be too hot to keep passing it, right? So it's a lot of it is related to budgeting and capacity to fund the social transformations. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the comments and the questions. It's very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you from my side, and thank you to the audience. Thank you for coming. And so we have one last lesson next time, and then looking forward to the summer semester. It will also take place in summer semester, and Esther Blanco will also participate in the upcoming semester. Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.